I should have brought my sunglasses. Welcome again, everyone. I am honored to introduce a true leader, innovator, and champion for freedom. As a member of the House Education and Labor Committee, I've looked closely at what's happened in the U.S. Department of Education. And I can tell you with certainty that there has never been a better friend to America's students in Washington than the friend they had in Betsy DeVos, and still have. Of course, this was nothing new for Betsy. She'd been an advocate for free people, free markets, and freedom of education for more than 3 decades, pursuing public policy reforms to provide students and families the freedom and flexibility and the resources they need to choose where, when, and how they learn. I've enjoyed getting to know Betsy, and I think we're going to learn a lot from her. And we're going to learn a lot from what she has to say today, because she is a true advocate for education. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the 11th Secretary of Education and my friend Betsy DeVos. I really admire your work. I really admire your work.
Hello, everyone. So it is so good to be back home and amongst so many friends. I must say I'm glad to come to the Mackinac Conference and not have to worry about making sure anything goes well, to just show up, because I had to do this for multiple times when I was state party chair, but that was great fun, and it's great fun to be here now. So people often ask me about my time in Washington. I guess I can say I enjoyed it, kind of like you enjoy a trip to the dentist. It's important, it's useful, it makes a difference, but you're quite happy once it's over with. But if there was one positive note to being in Washington during the past few years, it was that I didn't have to live under every second under the thumb of that woman from Michigan, your friend and mine, Gretchen Whitmer. Her mind-boggling actions during COVID were the first and only thing that ever made me prefer to spend the weekend in D.C. instead of coming home. And you should know, it takes a lot to make the mayor of D.C. look rational and measured. Of course, being in Washington did have some benefits. I really appreciated working with some of the great members of our congressional delegation, including the late Paul Mitchell. I'd like to ask us all to just pause a moment and honor Paul's memory. Thank you. Paul approached his governing work based on principles and deeply held beliefs. Sadly, that's true of all too few in Washington these days. But fortunately, there is an awakening happening across America. I see no more hopeful sign than moms and dads standing up at school board meetings, reminding everyone who's listening that students are our children, not theirs. Parents in every corner of this country have awakened to the realities of education in America. When parent groups have risen up in Ann Arbor to fight against the COVID lockdowns, then you know with certainty the liberals have gone too far. You can see evidence of this on TV and on radio right now as well. The union bosses are spending more than $1 million on advertising to try and fool the public into forgetting the unnecessary school closures. But we won't be fooled, and we won't forget. We can't forget. And we cannot let the people of Michigan forget what Governor Whitmer did to them, to our kids. The implication on individual students and on our long-term economy cannot be overstated. We're bracing to learn more details about the magnitude of learning loss and the breadth of negative developmental impact, but every early indication is that it won't be pretty. Every indication is that it's really a human tragedy in the making. No wonder Whitmer and the unions are so vehemently opposed to testing or benchmarking that would measure the learning loss created by their policies, policies that defied the science and the advice of their patron saint, Tony Fauci. Did you see, by the way, that Randy Weingarten, the head union boss, got caught editing the CDC's guidance for schools? You probably didn't, because that would require the media to actually cover wrongdoings in the Biden administration. Can you imagine if something like this had happened in the Trump administration? A special interest group intervenes and changes CDC guidance to align with political goals. Unreal and disgusting. But the union's behaviors may ultimately be the silver lining in all this. They've overplayed their hands at every turn. The public is turning on them, and what they may end up creating is what they fear most: empowered families. My first goal as Secretary of Education was to light a prairie fire across America for education freedom, for school choice, for the should-be-simple idea that education is about students, not systems, and accordingly, education funding should be tied to students, not systems and buildings. That the sole goal of public education should be to educate the public. I like to use the metaphor of a backpack. Kids take the things they need for school in them daily. Why not take the resources to whatever school works for them as well? The good news is, education freedom is on the march across America right now. Just this year, 21 states have passed or grown their programs. States like Florida, Kentucky, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Iowa have passed major bills. Our neighbors in Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois have expanded their programs this year. But here at home, Governor Whitmer couldn't even bring herself to support a small program that would help kids who fell behind on their reading skills during the pandemic. In fact, she specifically went to war against it. Big Gretch and the big union bosses believe there's only one solution: big government. Well, they're wrong, big time. Families can't wait, and we can't wait any longer as more and more kids fall further and further behind. Lansing must take action now to give every child in Michigan more opportunities and choices to learn. There was an encouraging sign of hope this week. 5 families brought a lawsuit against Whitmer for denying their ability to use their 529 accounts to pay for K-12 education. It was a change my friend Senator Ted Cruz and I helped make law in Washington. These families deserve the freedom to do what's best for their children, and Michigan's bigoted Blaine Amendment belongs in the ash heap of history. These families aren't alone in standing up for education freedom. The public support for family empowerment is overwhelming. A recent Real Clear opinion survey found that 3 out of 4 families with children in public schools want their education dollars to follow their children wherever they go to learn. Notably, 73% of Black families and 71% of Hispanic families say they want the same thing. You'd be really hard-pressed to find any other issue that's better for us politically. Education freedom is on the march in no small part because it's good policy. It works. It makes people's lives better. And this is what our party must be about. It must be about advancing policies that improve lives. It must be about defending and advancing our core principles. I worry that principles have been overtaken by personalities today. Politics now are so often about the people, not the policies that impact people's lives directly. Personalities are important to point us to our principles, but only when we keep them in the inverse order. Principles as championed by personalities. Ours is not a movement dependent on any one person. Instead, it's rooted in our foundational constitutional principles and their promise to every person in this great land. Those principles, the foundations of freedom, the timeless credos of our Constitution, are under assault like never before in Lansing and in Washington, D.C. We see it daily in jaw-dropping and astonishing ways. So it's important you're here. It's important you're engaged in the battle of ideas. And it's important that you stay in the fight. Ronald Reagan reminded us that freedom is a fragile thing that comes only once to a people. Let's take the charge and let's rise to the challenge to keep the flame of freedom burning brightly. I'm glad for the opportunity to be with you here today. Thanks for everything you've done and will continue to do to better the lives and opportunities for our fellow Michiganians. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. I'm now going to ask some tremendous women to join me on stage to keep the discussion going on how we can do better for students across our state. Please join me in welcoming State Senator Lana Tice, State Representative Pam Hornberger, Bronwyn Haltom, and Lindsay Kronemeyer. Ladies, thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thank you.
You're all leaders, you're moms, you're advocates for change, and you care deeply about students in our state. So let's start with quick introductions. I introduced your names, but can you each introduce yourself and just talk briefly about your own passion for education?
So I'm State Senator Lana Tice. I chair Education and Career Readiness in the Senate. My district is Livingston County in western two-thirds of Washtenaw, but more importantly, I'm a mom and a grandma. There's very little in legislation that we can do, especially as term-limited legislators, that will affect our community more than education. Our children need the American dream. In order to do that, they need to have access to the best education possible. The only way we get to do that is by changing things. We can't double down on failure, which is what we've been doing. So our opportunities are broad. There's a lot of room to move up. And so this is an area that I'm extraordinarily passionate about. Thank you.
Thanks, Lana.
I'm Pam Hornberger. I am the state representative from the 32nd District, Macomb County and part of St. Clair County. I'm the education chair in the House, Lana's counterpart. I come to the House with a strong education background. I'm a mom, so I've had a K-12 student and now a college student. I taught school for 23 years in the public schools. Actually, I am a Democrat's worst nightmare. I taught art. So I taught K-12 art for 20 years, and then my last 2.5 years, I taught middle school, high school art. And then at the same time, I also served on a local school board in one of the larger districts in Macomb County. So I've seen the 30-foot view and the 30,000-foot view, and then getting to work with Lana and with my counterparts and my peers in the legislature. It's been pretty eye-opening.
Awesome. Thank you, Pam. Bronwyn.
Hello. My name is Bronwyn Haltom, and education is so personal for me. It really started at home. I was homeschooled as well as my brother and sister. I ended up going to the local community college and then ended up graduating from the University of Michigan. So I have to start by saying thank you for everything you and your family have done for homeschool families in Michigan. It's just incredible. When I was, when we were starting out homeschooling, it was a little bit better, but people that we knew, they talked about how they didn't used to let their kids answer the phone during the day because they were worried that the local authorities might come after them for homeschooling. So the work that you've done, it's just incredible. So that's where my passion comes from, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
And what a great testimony to homeschooling you are.
Well, thank you. It's an honor.
Lindsay.
My name is Lindsay Kronemeyer. I have a lot of different titles, but the most important one is mom. I have 2 little boys that are in 3rd and 1st grade, And education has always been something that's really important to me and has just continued to be as I've watched the impact the public school had on them, and now as we've transitioned them into the private school, the even greater positive impact we've seen. I also serve on a charter academy school board, which has been a wonderful opportunity, and so excited that that option is out there for children as well, and we need to continue to have more of that.
Thanks, Lindsay. So Senator Tice, you spearheaded the legislation I mentioned earlier to take $155 million of the billions of dollars allocated to Michigan in the federal COVID bills to help struggling readers catch up. It made a ton of sense, so naturally Governor Whitmer vetoed it. What impact do you think it will have on those students, and what message do you think it sends about her priorities?
So there's almost nothing that is more indicative of success than understanding where our children are at in their ability to read in 3rd grade. We can make all kinds of assumptions about where they're going to go in life by their ability within 3rd grade to read. So giving the parents the ability to make some decisions, to understand the hurdles for where their children are at, and then to be able to overcome those hurdles. So I'm going to do a poll. How many of you are parents? All right. How many of you think you care more about your kids than your teachers did? What a novel concept. How many think you care more about the kids than the government does? I'd say it's pretty universal. I happen to agree with you. And you know more about your kids than what the teachers and the administrators did. This gave you the opportunity to make the decisions, gave you the power to put them in place to actually overcome the hurdles. And that the governor vetoed it says everything about where her priorities are. Her priorities are not the children. And that's the biggest issue we have in the education system today. It is not about the kids.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. So right. And we know so many kids fell so woefully behind, and it's the ones who could least afford to miss those opportunities that are the ones that are going to pay the biggest price.
That's correct.
Yeah. Representative Hornberger, you were a teacher and a school board member. As you said, you know how the system works. Were you still surprised by how the system handled COVID? How well or how poorly? And how aggressively Governor Whitmer worked to keep kids away from learning?
Actually, I'm not surprised. I think coming to Lansing and doing this job, this position, serving in this position, has been eye-opening as to how horrible the MEA actually is and how activist a lot, not all, but a lot of our teachers are. And I think that a lot of them saw it as an opportunity when students were kept out of the classroom. And we had a superintendent in my local area, and one of the larger districts in the state actually uttered the words that he didn't know how he was going to get his teachers back into the classroom. So very eye-opening. But I also think it's been very eye-opening for parents. A lot of times, for a long time, I think parents have just gone along with what's happening in our education system. As a board member, we used to see the most parents would show up if it was an issue that affected sports. Parents would show up. If it was an issue that affected academics, not too many. You might see a handful of them, but sports, you're going to mess with the sports program, and a lot of parents would show up. I think now that kids were home and parents saw what was actually being delivered from their school district and realized that a lot of times it was subpar, that parents are fired up and they're engaged, and we need to really take advantage of that. We need to hit the ground running here and take advantage of these, the parents and families and start putting students and families first.
Well, and just to build on what you said, I've heard from so many families who said they saw, kids families whose children were in charter schools or small faith-based schools.
Yes.
And they were all in person in the classroom.
Yes.
And managing it just fine.
Oh, yeah.
And yet so many kids were shut out of that experience.
There's a huge opportunity here with all of the money that's flowing into schools right now from the state and from the Fed. It's the most money our school districts have ever seen, ever. And if we don't use this money and this opportunity to hold school districts accountable for what they're doing now, they should be addressing the social, emotional issues of students by hiring counselors, by hiring more school nurses, by hiring teaching assistants and parapros. And in 3-4 years, when you see a data cycle go through, we should see, if they're doing things correctly, some major growth in our students, in their learning. And if we don't, then the constant argument for more money is out the door.
Yeah, good point. So Bron, when you were already mentioned, you were homeschooled, a path many more families chose in this last year. What do people not understand about homeschooling, and how do you see it as one of the solutions to what's wrong in the government-run system?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say to anybody that's thinking about homeschooling, anybody that's starting homeschooling, welcome. It's amazing. There are incredible opportunities, and there are so many resources. I think sometimes parents that I talk to think, well, it's just going to be me sitting at home. Growing up, and for years and years, when people found out that I was homeschooled, they would ask 2 questions every time. First, did you have friends? And second, for some reason, did you wear pajamas? Universally, I was asked that over and over. So yes, or no to both, yes and no to those. But I just want to say, people think of homeschooling as being in the house. That is so completely not my experience, and especially in Michigan. I went to a tutoring session. The local schools integrate many of them very, very well with homeschooling. So there's resources for sports, for arts, for the performing arts. And then for me in my path, I think a lot of what parents worry about is, are my kids falling behind? Are they going to do testing? How do we evaluate it? And then how can we translate this down the road? Can my kids go to college? Can they only go to an online school or kind of a more traditional path for homeschooling? For me, I went to the local community college. All we did was we drove down the road, you took one test. At 16 years old, I tested into college-level classes, and then for 2 years in high school, I went full-time to the community college. And then that way, you're transferring into a 4-year college with about 60 credits. You do that in 3 years. So I just want to say there's so many paths. It's very different from the movies, so we're working to change that. But I'm just so excited. We're seeing 50%, 100% increase in homeschooling. It's not the only option, and that's what I would say. We need to focus on students, not systems, like the secretary said. And for so many families, it can be a really good resource. So if anybody out there is considering it, call me, talk to me afterwards. It was great for me. Not for every student, but it can be a great resource.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Lindsay, you faced the problem of woefully deficient public school plans during COVID as a parent, and I understand it left you no choice but to pull your kids and put them into a different school. So tell us a little bit about that discussion in your household, because I think it's a discussion that's happened at kitchen tables across the country in the last 18 months. And how did your ability to make that choice help your kids succeed?
Yeah, so that was a discussion that we started having actually well before COVID, because of some issues we were facing in the public school that were only amplified by COVID. My kids started in 2019 in young fives and first grade, and when my 5-year-old showed up for the first day of school, they didn't have a classroom or a teacher for him. He went almost 3 months out of that year without a consistent teacher in a class of 27 5-year-olds. So you can imagine the quality of education he was getting just wasn't there. So when we transitioned to a virtual setting, they were ill-prepared. They didn't provide us good resources. We would hop on Zoom calls where he would be just as frustrated as I was with the content and saying, "Mom, I'm not being challenged. I'm not learning anything." So when June of 2020 came along, I started really trying to fight for the public schools to give better options, to be more prepared, because I saw from my time on the charter school board what can be done and how it can be handled well. Wasn't making any progress there. So we started to have discussions about, this is the time, this is our sign, we need to bite the bullet and explore the private school, the Christian school option for good. To throw an even bigger monkey wrench into all of this, my husband deployed in March of 2020 and didn't come home until April 2021. So I was navigating a lot of these decisions alone with a lot of uncertainty, trying to figure out how are we going to pay for this? How am I going to get them to and from school? And eventually ended up deciding, though, that this would be the best option for our kids because they could be learning full-time, in person, with minimal restrictions on them. And oh my goodness, the impact we've seen on our 2 boys last year and already into this year has been incredible. And I know it's good because they tell me they're 7 today and 9 in just a couple months. Mom, thank you for sending us here. We love our school, we love our friends. We get to do hands-on science experiments. My friend at the public school, he doesn't get to do that. Mom, we get to go out and grow things in a garden, and they don't get to do that at the public school. And the quality of education and the more one-on-one time they get to have in the smaller class sizes has made the world of a difference on our children, their education, and just how much they love going to school every day.
Thanks, Lindsay. What a great testimonial. And just to, kind of continue the discussion, when we talk about giving parents education freedom and choices and finding the right fit for their students, it's not to suggest that every family and every parent would make a decision to move or change. Yeah. For many families, their assigned school is working for them. So it's not in any way to denigrate their choice or their decision, but it's to say, look, it's not working for everyone, so we need to make sure we allow avenues for all families to find that right fit for their kids. So you all know how I feel about education freedom, but I wonder if you could each just share briefly why you believe students in Michigan need more options. I think we've covered some of that, but you might have another little twist on it. And then, importantly, legislators, how we can make that happen. Oh, let's start down with Lindsay at the end.
Yeah, I think having that choice is crucial. Thing that parents should have. I say this with a lot of different things going on right now, and like was mentioned, I'm not anti-public school, I'm not pro-public school. I'm pro being able to make that decision for my child. We were really blessed to have the financial means to make it happen, and a lot of kids don't, and that's really, really disheartening because that power should be in the hands of the parent, not in the hands of the government. And I think having that choice is just so important. Whether your child needs some more specialized attention, maybe you just want to make sure that your values are being taught to your kids. It's crucial to have that choice. I think parents want it. I think we're seeing it, and it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah. Well, what I would say on that is it's the very students that need the most help that are least able to get it. So in having school of choice in our county, okay, you don't like the school that you're in. If you have a flexible schedule, you can choose a school down the road. If you're available at 3:30 to go pick up your student. But if you're not, if you're working minimum wage, if you're working 2 jobs, you're not able to take advantage of that program. We see in Florida that they have transportation scholarships where you're actually able to use school of choice even if you work 2-3 jobs. So I think there's so many other opportunities that I see Governor Ricketts out there that amazing Republican governors are doing in other states that when we fire Gretchen Whitmer, I think we're going to make some amazing progress here. So I would love to see that.
So the best thing we can do here in Michigan for educational choice is to elect a Republican governor and keep Republican majority in the House and the Senate. We cannot, it is difficult for Senator Tice and I. We cannot get legislation passed, good legislation that supports students and families. If we don't have a governor that's going to sign it, it doesn't matter. So that's the first thing we can do. The second thing we can do is provide as many options as possible, whether it's school choice within a district, whether it's school choice with charter schools in a community, whether it's families being allowed or being able to take scholarship dollars and use that to supplement education, and even with private schools. So as much choice as we can have in education so that we're empowering students and families and doing the best we can here in Michigan, because quite frankly, Michigan education is scraping the bottom of the barrel. We should be embarrassed what we offer students and families. And like I said earlier, with the amount of money that's flowing in right now to education, if we are not seeing astronomical gains in student growth within the next 3 to 4 years, then we need to completely dismantle the education system and start over.
Thank you.
I want to tell a couple of stories. So during the shutdown, we lost 65,000 kids out of the traditional public school system. And by lost, I mean they just, well, that's not a good thing. We literally lost them. The superintendents followed through and figured out where 50,000 of them were. Do the math. 15,000, we have no idea what happened to them. Now, they might have moved out of state. They might have decided to homeschool, but the majority of people who move out of state and decide to homeschool tell their superintendents, hey, I'm moving out of state, or I'm going to homeschool, or I'm taking my kid to a parochial school. They don't just disappear. That's a failure in our education system that desperately needs to be repaired. Now, if those kids were succeeding in school, do you think those parents would have done that? No. You don't take your kid out of a successful school and try to find something else. So to panelists' point, yes, we have good ideas for legislation, but right now, the people at the top are putting blocks in and making it impossible for us to get those through. I'm talking to teachers all the time who desperately want changes made. I'm talking to parents all the time who desperately want changes made. They were the ones sitting home watching their children crying, trying to figure out how to do their math over Zoom. They were the ones who were considered educated because they checked in or had one back and forth email per week.
Yeah.
This is not education. This desperately needs to be improved, and it can be. When you have somebody moving from one county to another county because the other county actually has schools that are open and they can do in-person education, children are crying as they get to school in gratitude because they're seeing other children's faces. My granddaughter is so excited to be in preschool, she's actually seeing people. Mm-hmm. She's 3. She doesn't remember seeing people without masks. Think about what we've done to our kids. We can fix this, and the fix is choice. The fix is allowing the people who care the most about those children the opportunities to take the children where it works.
So we've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to specifically ask each of your perspectives and opinions on what and who stands in the way of every child in Michigan being able to access the best, most personalized education to meet each of their unique needs.
Yeah.
Lana, we'll start with you.
I think I've already talked about it. The people who are directly working with the kids, it's not usually them. It's sometimes them. I mean, there were school systems that shut down through COVID and never opened. Mm-hmm. Think about what that was like for those kids. You've got an elementary school, a kindergartner, first grader, never seeing a face, never being able to see how you articulate vowels, what that was like for the entire year for that child. You can't do that and expect a child to be able to be educated and we're going to catch them up. No, that's not how that works. But it's not generally the teachers that I'm experiencing, not the direct teachers. Some of them, but not most of them. Most of them genuinely want to do what's good for the kids. It's as they get into the leadership, as you get into the upper administrative bureaucracies that it becomes problematic. And then as you get bills on the governor's desk that get vetoed, or financial budgetary items that get redlined, where we end up having our issues. So absolutely, we need a governor that is actually going to sign education reform.
Well, I said it earlier, the groups that are standing in the way are the teachers' unions. Yeah. And somewhat, too, the groups that most of you probably have never heard of or aren't familiar with, a principals association, a superintendent's association, a school board association. When I first joined the school board in L'Anse Creuse Public Schools, it was eye-opening to me because I didn't know that there was a board association that existed. And then they want to bring you in and coddle you and teach you that the superintendent, you just listen to them, do what they tell you to do. You don't know anything about education. But it was different with me because I knew something about education. So I think a lot of those groups a lot of times throw up roadblocks when we're trying to do things that open doors for students and for parents to be empowered to ask questions and demand better for their students. And so, not only is it the teachers union, and I'm not saying teachers because I was a conservative and a teacher at the same time, and there were many of us, but we kept our mouths shut and went in our classroom and did our job. But a lot of those groups and those unions, they throw up roadblocks constantly. And when you have those people chirping in the governor's ear when there is good legislation that she may be willing to work with us on and they're saying no, then it's not happening. So it's going to be interesting to maneuver around them for the next year or to attempt to. But we need to work beyond those groups and do what's best for our students.
Well, I like how you distinguish teachers from the teachers union, all of the allies of the teachers union. Organizationally, I had to deal with all of that alphabet soup on a regular basis in Washington, and those are the national chapters, and then there's all the state chapters and the local chapters, and I have found over the years, and it was only amplified and magnified in Washington, that they're really there to serve adult issues and needs, not kids. It's not focused on doing what's right for individual students.
I've said it numerous times in my committee during committee meetings that it is frustrating for me to sit there and realize that there is no one in Lansing, no one that comes into those meetings that's advocating for students and parents. No one. Those groups constantly show up to advocate for what's best for the adults in the room, whether it be someone running a school district or the people teaching or another group, but they're constantly advocating for adults, and there's no one sitting there advocating for students and families.
Yeah. But we have you guys. That's right. Rhonda, you have thoughts on that?
A trend that I see that I just find so concerning is the politicization of our schools, whether it be CRT, whether it be the debate on masking. I find it terrifying because anybody that can is going to take their kids out of public schools, and that's not what I want. I was at a school board meeting recently, and a new term, I hadn't heard it before. It was repeated several times, so it must be in somebody's talking points, but it was mask equity. So they were no longer talking about
Mask equity.
They were no longer talking about the science of masking or why you should do it or why you shouldn't, but it's about equity because some student may want to wear a mask and they shouldn't have to feel like they're different for wearing it. So they were advocating, several of them, that every student should be wearing a mask for equity reasons. And it was just the most insane thing. So I think the thing that I'm excited about is, like you said, that parents are coming. And I hope they start coming to Lansing, and I hope they start filling the offices as advocates for students and kids.
Yes.
Aside from what everybody else has mentioned, I think two big things is misconceptions around education and educational choice. Bronwyn's example of homeschooling is the perfect example of that. We don't understand these things, so we often tend to not want to have conversation around them, not want to move forward with these ideas that actually at their core are really, really great. And if we could just have good discussions about them, I think most parents would jump on board and believe in that too. And I think that that's really sad that those misconceptions exist. And because of things like politics being drug into it, teachers' unions, all of these different special interest groups, these conversations aren't being had. So on top of all of those, just that misconception is getting in the way.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. So we have time for one last quick round of question. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but I see this as a great window of opportunity.
Yeah.
What would each of you say to the moms or the grandmas out there in Michigan who want to see better education for their kids?
Take advantage of the choice that you have. Show up at the school board meetings and let your voice be heard. and run for office at the school board meeting. You have no idea how much power you have. Prior to just lately, if 12 people showed up at a school board meeting, it was an incredibly controversial day. Now, if 500 people are there, they're recognizing that there's a major issue and they're figuring out how to address it. But a lot of the folks that are on those school boards decided to serve, but it's not that they wanted to undermine the education system. They're getting the information that they're getting from the professionals, and they're believing the information that they have, and they're not going necessarily deeper. They have full-time jobs too. So be there, be nice, and help inform them. Let them understand what it is that's going on, what it is that's sitting before them. And if what you're saying isn't working, then run and replace them.
Thanks, Lon.
Yep, and I'll piggyback on that. That is one of the reasons I ran for school board. I was a teacher. We had a young child going into public schools, and we thought about sending her to private school. And I wanted to make my public schools better as a public school teacher. And the best thing I did was ask questions. I got elected to the school board, and I just methodically asked questions. You don't have to be a naysayer. You don't have to, be the constant irritant in the room, but you do need to ask questions. And when you do that, you need to demand answers. You can't let someone just push you off and not answer the questions. If you're asking a superintendent question, they need to give you an answer. You're the elected official that's there representing the parents and the people in that community. And I think it's an important role. It's one of the most important roles that we see in local government.
Agreed. Absolutely. Thank you, Pam.
Well, I'm an optimist. I think we're going to get some amazing legislation that focus on students, not systems. So I'm forever an optimist. I think we're going to get those reading scholarships. Reading's really personal to me. I struggled reading, and I can't imagine what my life would have been like if I hadn't gotten that personal attention. So I just hope those third graders, those fifth graders, they're going to get that. I believe we will. So thank you for the work that all of you up here are doing to advocate for our students.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Lindsay.
And I'll piggyback on all of that and say, get out there, learn, show up, know who your school board members are, know what they're talking about in the meetings, know what your children are being taught. Just learn and ask questions and be open to different ideas and exploring those ideas. I think we have all become more aware over the past couple of years as to what's happening in our education system, and I'm really hoping that that continues to further the discussion we're having, like today, about broadening school choice.
Ladies, thank you so much for joining the discussion today, each one of you. I hope all of you feel as energized and optimistic as I do. Let's all go work together and create and improve options for kids. Thanks so much.